fluffy custom features.
That's the wild weasel.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Dan Maloney. I'm a staff writer at Hackaday.com and a community engineer at Hackaday.io.
This is episode 193. Today we'll be talking about found computers, internet over WhatsApp, two-factor C64, shifting cars, and self-shooting fighter planes. What is in the news this week, Dan?
First of all, I mean, this is your first week back to normal after SuperCon. You recovered?
Mostly.
Mostly.
And then I went out to Electronica, this super huge trade show, and I'm unrecovered again. Too many people, too much electronics.
Fell off the wagon, did you?
I did. Actually, it's really funny. I saw a number of the same people at Electronica who were just in SuperCon. Of course, a lot of that is the supply frame stuff, but then a bunch of hackers too. I was walking around and Mike Harrison from Mike's Electric Stuff was there.
Oh,
Alex,
cool.
who makes tiny LED matrices, was there. I saw BitLooney. I saw... Who else? Let's see. I ran into Stephen Hawes and Lucien Chapar. They're the ones making the Lumen open source PNP machine, and we had a good time talking. And then he told me there was all these other people I missed that I should have seen. So we'll see. I'm going to go back again tomorrow, and I'll see if I can catch up with everyone else.
Sounds far too social for me. I think I preferred my evening last night of watching the first moon launch in 50 years, right? I mean, 1972, I think was Apollo 17, and Artemis 1 finally got off the ground.
Third time's a charm.
It was interesting. I mean, it was 1:05 a.m. East Coast time, so I was only about 10:30 by the time it finally launched for me out here. So it was reasonable for me. I usually go to bed pretty early, but I stayed up for this one, just like I did in 1969 for Apollo 11. But it was impressive. I thought, a night launch would be just spectacular. And it was. I mean, you see the intensity of the light and the energy and the heat and all that. You can really see the, structure of the exhaust plume. It's almost like the rocket is building this exhaust plume and standing on it and just kind of, extruding out this. And that's exactly what's happening, obviously, but it almost looks like a solid object. But then it gets up high enough that the cameras are seeing nothing but the plume, and it just lights. It's very, very bright and then very, very dark around it. So you don't see a lot of detail and all that. It was still very exciting to watch. I mean, it was over in 8 minutes. There we go. We're in orbit in 8 minutes.
That's crazy.
I will say that NASA kind of needs to take a page out of SpaceX's book for launch razzle dazzle. SpaceX is pretty good about that. They have a lot of, they had a lot of commentators and stuff like that. But during the actual launch, you didn't have that cool dashboard that SpaceX has to tell you, how many G's you're experiencing right now, what your altitude is, what your range, your down range is, all that kind of stuff that really makes it engaging, I guess.
Right. Right.
Kind of disappointed they didn't have any of that, but I was just happy that they got the thing up there and on the way to the moon. So.
Moon launch 8 out of 10 needs more razzle dazzle.
That would be my bottom line. Yeah. 8 out of 10 would launch again.
Hopefully would. Yeah. Well, next time they're putting people on it, right? This one is unmanned. I was reading through some of the news and all the stories are about the dummies they have on board, which are pretty fun. They're basically two of them are set up to be radiation measuring dummies, and one of them has the radiation protection suit on it and the other doesn't. And I think that's kind of fun too. So there's what kind of radiation people get exposed to. And I shouldn't say people, they're actually women-shaped dummies, and they're like anatomically correct. And they've got tissue for heads and breasts and everything. It's really... They're really trying to instrument out human bodies for this to see how, not just how people get radiation doses, but how radiation doses accumulate in what tissues in women as opposed to in men.
It makes sense. And this will tie into to one of the things I'm going to talk about later on. Not doing engineering by the seat of the pants, but doing it more planned. And you've got to think things like this out. I mean, no women have ever been this far out in space as they will be in however many months it'll be before Artemis 2 comes along. So you got to know. You can't just guess that everything's going to be cool. So
that's exactly what they're saying too. It's like, this is going to be a first, so it's time for us to study up. Yeah. So next flight is with people on board, and then the third flight is going to be first woman to the moon.
Yeah.
Keep your fingers crossed, knock on wood and stuff like that. Not like that's what NASA does, by the way.
Absolutely.
I don't mean to insinuate that.
I'm sure there's no Lucky Charms and no superstitious little tokens and medals and stuff. None of that at NASA. Absolutely none of that.
I bet they get a little superstitious, but, they double check too.
They're probably just regular stitious, not superstitious.
Exactly.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
Oh, yeah, we got the What's That Sound challenge. Hold on a sec. Let me get you.
Oh, yeah.
You could go fetch the sound out real quick. Let's see if you guess it.
No mistake about that one.
Too easy?
Too easy.
What you got?
That is a servo cranking back and forth.
Totally. Yeah, this was Mike Stitch's suggestion that I do a servo motor for people. And I'll tell you what, everybody guessed this one. We have 70 answers. 69 of them are correct, ladies and gentlemen. So that's not bad. And most of them are full of people admonishing me for driving a servo motor with my own hands. Because I actually was... It is true that I, just took a servo this is actually a little robot joint I built, and I was just going like this, and so many of these it's an RC servo being back driven by hand. Somebody suggests it's a SG90. I don't think it is. It's actually what is it? It's a Tower Hobbies something. It's S3000 or something. It's not a bad servo. So underpowered servo being turned manually, you're not quite right. Underpowered servo being turned forcefully, no, it's got enough play. It's not so bad. Manually moving the arm of an unpowered servo, you're going to break it. Well, we'll see, won't we?
All right.
Anyway.
If it's going to make everybody mad, then there we go.
Ooh,
I got a micro server here. So there you go.
It's the pressure melting thermoplastic teeth of a poor little servo. Yeah. Good job. Everybody has much empathy for my servo motor, so thank you all for that. Man, yours sounded like gritty. What was up with that?
That's a really cheap little tiny one.
Is it? Yeah,
it's super cheap.
So let's see. How the heck am I going to do?
You have to roll your 69-sided dice.
Dude, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go deep on this one. We're gonna have to do my random image script, I think. Let me hit that up because that's my only hope. So this is a script I wrote that takes a picture of me with my video camera, hashes it, and then extracts the value of that modulo whatever I tell it to. And so we got 69 people. We're gonna do it modulo 69. I figure that's as random as it gets.
Do we get to see the picture of you, the random seed?
Oh, does it save the picture? Let me see. Yes. I can include the image. You can verify the hash yourselves if you want to. That's actually kind of funny. I'll think about it. Well, let's see how it looks. Let me have a look at the picture. The number is 37. And, oh yeah, the picture. Oh, dude, I closed my eyes. And it's really dark in here. That's a horrible picture. But who cares? That MD5 sums out to something modulo 37. And that would be... The winner is Leon E. Congratulations, Leon. I'll be getting in touch with you and get you a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt. For the rest of you, I'll put the script up so you can take bad pictures of yourself blinking and you can post them on the internet. I think this one isn't going to go.
Randomization by derp.
It really is. It's like underexposed too because it's nighttime up here. Well, let's start off the hacks. I'd like to start off with kind of a new twist on a very classic hack. This is dial-up internet over WhatsApp. And Alex Rodriguez Alameda is the hacker in question. This is so funny. He found himself in a situation where he has limited internet connection, but absolutely free and unlimited WhatsApp traffic. And so his game is to, naturally, post data on a WhatsApp server on one side and receive it on the other. The client actually uses WebSockets between it and the server. The really tricky part, as far as I can tell, is the server side of this, and he ends up using a piece of code called Bailey's, which is a JavaScript-based WhatsApp web API. And so he's using that to send out the data on the server side. The client side is then in this GitHub repo that he has linked in the article. And so you dial up your number on the client, it connects to the server, and then you can send a bunch of data. I say this is a classic hack because sending internet packets over whatever is like the fun classic networking hack. He warns us that using this library may get your WhatsApp account banned, so do it with a temporary number at your own risk.
I guess, if you're desperate enough, everything is the internet, right?
Absolutely.
Anything that's got a connection, okay, fine. We can figure out a way to stuff a little data over it. I mean,
IP over carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a ton of other hacks that people have used to exfiltrate kind of small amounts of data. The first one of these I ever saw was actually covered on Hackaday way back in 2009. I'll throw the link in the show notes. And this one was tunneling traffic over ICMP pings. So it's basically setting up a server that will then send you data through the... What was it using? I think it was something sketchy like the hardware address or something. It was, what was it? Where was it encoding the data? Let me see if I can find it. Is this website? Oh my God, this website's still here. Ladies and gentlemen, I have clicked on a website from 2009 that still exists. And it's not Hackaday. Another way to go, of course, is using DNS requests. Those are also often not blocked on open Wi-Fi routers, and so there's hacks using that. And finally, to top it all off, I've seen all of this done on an ESP8266. And so basically, no matter how they are trying to shut down your internet, as long as you can get through at least one of these various resources, you can get some data through, as long as you have the server set up, of course, on the other side, ready to catch it. These old ping ones have a very small payload. I think this WebSockets one can do, a few hundred K at a time. So it's actually maybe not 100% horrible if you're desperate. 300 kps, they're saying, during testing. That's not bad. That's like old school dial-up. That's like good old school dial-up.
Yeah. I would have been thrilled about that at some points in history here. I mean, in a kind of... There's kind of analogies in the ham radio world too, with packet radio and WinLink and things like that. You certainly don't have quote unquote the internet, but you do have ways to use the internet that don't necessarily rely on the standard infrastructure, which is that whole area of ham radio is really fascinating and really, really a lot of fun to play with. I need to get into that more. It's kind of along these lines too. First up for me is generating two-factor authentication codes with a Commodore 64. Cameron Kaiser is behind this one, and they always say with authentication, you should have something your password, and something you have, a token of some sort. And we're all kind of used to either having a token app on our phones or actually a physical hardware token. I used to have one of those from my old company that was like basically a credit card thing with a very tiny little LCD display, and you'd press it and get a number. You get your 6-digit number, enter that in, and you're authenticated. Well, Cameron took a slightly different approach to that by using the Commodore SX64, which was the sort of luggable version of the Commodore 64 from back in the day. 20 kilograms, 10 kilograms. Not exactly key fob material, but certainly has a bit of security by gravity, I guess, if you want to call it that. Nobody's going to be lifting this thing and trying to break into your accounts. I mean, it's obviously a ridiculous thing, it's not particularly useful, although he does make use of it. In fact, he's even got the keys for different sites on different colored 5.25-inch floppy drives, unlabeled, of course. He'll know what color to put in the floppy drive for each site. So there's a certain amount of security by ignorance in there. I think what's really interesting about this, though, is the fact that it's an example of one of those explorations of what's possible design-wise with severely constrained hardware. I mean, this is an 8-bit machine doing 32-bit math. That alone is worth the price of reading the blog entry, which is long and detailed and chock full of really good, interesting tidbits. So you should go check that out. But it's also it's just kind of fun to see what's possible with this old hardware. Kind of put me in mind of, I mean, could you do something like this with something mechanical if you really wanted to? You did make like a Babbage engine or something like that does two-factor authentication. Pointless, but really, really cool to do. And it would be even heavier than this too. So you'd have that security by gravity extra bonus as well. Just got a tip in the tip lines about a mechanical Bitcoin miner. It ended up not being quite that. It was more of a demonstration than actually doing anything. But it got me thinking about things, mechanical substitutes for things that we do by default with electronics. Could you mine Bitcoin completely mechanically?
I have to take one little bit of exception with this. If this is using a time-based one-time password type thing, which I think it is, this one always rubs me the wrong way. And to be fair, the industry has shied away from the, thing you have, to admitting that it's actually just two things you know. Because deep inside most of these time-based one-time passwords is actually just another password. In fact, it's another long password that's hashed with the time, and then they send you that result out. And what that means is that to verify it on the server side, they have to have that password as well and hash it with the time and see if you come up with the same thing. And that sounds good, except it means that your password is stored both locally for you and then also unencrypted, or at least decryptable on that server. And that's like, if you look around at what makes passwords get compromised, there's like hundreds of millions of passwords in password databases that go lost every year. And my guess is not that many people lose little Post-it notes that they've stuck to the screen on their computer. So if I were to bet on what is the more secure way to store a password, on a piece of Post-it note in my office, or on some random company's server somewhere out there in the internet, I would put my bet on the Post-it note every day. But that bit aside, the TOTPs are really fun. I took a deep look at them in an article I'll link in here for you, mostly because I just had a lot of fun writing the Python code to do it from the ground up. But what's nice about doing it yourself that way is that, if you can extract the code out of whatever phone-based app you've got, you can then copy that onto a computer like it was any other password and generate the time-based password versions yourself. And 2, it kind of demystifies the whole thing. And 3, the comments there got into a really good place and went into U2F, which is a better way to do this whole thing. None of this has anything to do with Commodore 64s or crazy old hacks. So
ever since that first time that, like I said, my old company gave me this two-factor card, which I thought was just a brilliant piece of engineering because
they're awesome.
I mean, it was so thin and I marveled at it. Like, how is this thing, even possible? And this was probably back in the 90s or early 2000s. I looked at it and I realized it was changing every 30 seconds or 60 seconds, whatever it was. And it always baffled me that there was the ability to keep this little card clock sufficiently in sync with something on the server side, and that there would have to be some drift. So I just didn't know how that would work. And so I read an explainer that I found. I'll put a link to it in here too, that says, yeah, actually they do drift, and that's something that can be accounted for. But anyways, my instinct was right that there is a clock in there that has to stay in sync, and eventually it does drift out to a point where it can't be corrected for. That was actually one of the challenges that Cameron faced here was just doing time manipulations in a Commodore 64 is not trivial to do. You get the real-time clock that tells you, your the current time is, and it gives you a string of characters that tells you what the time is, rather than a string of numbers or a 32 bit number that tells you what the current time is, like we would do today. And doing those conversions is not trivial. So hats off to Cameron for figuring that out, and also for giving me the inspiration to finally answer some questions in my head about how this time-based authentication tokens work.
My next hack is a retro computer hack. Emulate any ISA card with a Raspberry Pi and an FPGA. This is really crazy if you think about it. I can't tell if it shows how insanely powerful modern hardware is, or if it just shows that some people are cleverer than they should be. In this case, Eigenco has made a universal emulator for anything retro on an ISA bus. And it includes an FPGA to do the kind of level shifting and a Raspberry Pi to do the emulation. And what he's able to do with this then is emulate kind of arbitrary old retro computer sound cards, but also other things like a hard drive or a serial mouse or whatever. It's all done in software on the Raspberry Pi. And that's the whole game right there. It's really funny to see him plugging this thing into like an old 386 motherboard, and boom, it's the sound card running, super old DOS games pretending to be a Gravis ultrasound or whatever. I love the idea that you could do this. And as Robin Carey, who writes this up for us, said in the end, this, you could replace anything with this, like an old CD-ROM drive, and some of those old school CD-ROMs are completely just, none of them work anymore. So this would actually become super beneficial. I can imagine it's useful for cracking some copy protection. Anyway, Robin concludes with, of course, you could just take this to its logical extreme and simply implement the whole PC in the FPGA or run it in MAME on the Pi. So, of course, that's true. I think the point here is that he's got some really old hardware that he wants to get up and running and see if he can make it work. And it's missing just this one little part. And then this is the project that lets you emulate it.
That teetering tower of cards that's plugged into the bus on this motherboard is impressive. What am I seeing? 1, 2. I guess there's 3 levels of cards all stacked up, with the Pi sitting up at top. And
Yeah.
Wow.
What's the worst that could happen?
Right. I mean, maybe a little strain relief or something would be well, whatever. It's benchtop stuff. It's not made for production. So, but yeah, you're right. It is a lot of fun, and seeing some of those old games that were more or less hardware specific come back to life is probably worth the effort right there.
Yeah, and you don't want to need to have a sound blaster for this game and something else for that game. You don't need the special joystick ports, none of that. You want that, you load the software up on the Raspberry Pi and boom, you've got it. It's like Swiss Army knife of ISA emulations toolkit. I think this is one of those things that'll end up being super handy for basically any of the retro computer enthusiasts out there running this stuff. It reminds me also of a similar project we ran a couple weeks back, Pico Gus. Ian Scott, alias Pulpo, is doing it just with a Raspberry Pi Pico. So not even a Raspberry Pi, just a little RP2040 based microcontroller Pico. But here it's kind of limited to just doing the Gravis ultrasound. Putting a whole Raspberry Pi, like a whole computer in there, is maybe a little bit overkill. On the other hand, it makes the device super flexible, so you can have it emulate whatever the heck it is you need this time. So all of these are really interesting, and it's really kind of fun to see everybody hacking together new retro computer hardware.
Yeah, so in the closing of this, Robin mentions that this could come in handy to replace other unobtainium hardware. Well, what about unobtainium Raspberry Pis? You gotta,
Ouch.
can you can you replace the Raspberry Pi with one of these? And it's just a stack of FPGAs all the way up.
Sick burn. I bet you could emulate a Raspberry Pi on a Commodore 64 and you could just stack that on top.
Let's ask Cameron. Next up for me, reverse engineering reveals EV charger has a sense of security. I actually wrote this one up yesterday. It caught my eye because I absolutely love these exploit sort of after action reports on how reverse engineering efforts are undertaken and what the results were and what was learned. I love them. This one was especially good. This is Harrison Sand and Andreas Clayson, who took apart a Zaptec Pro EV charger. Basically, what they wanted to do was see what this thing offered as far as an attack profile. Would there be anything in this that you could possibly, or a black hat kind of hacker could take over this thing and have free charging? And it would seem that there would be plenty of ways in. I mean, it has Wi-Fi, 4G, Bluetooth, RFID, power line communications too. So it's got a lot of potential vectors into this thing. So they wanted to see what it offered as far as vulnerabilities. Turns out not much. Contrary to a lot of electronics these days, security seems to have been taken into account as a first concept rather than as a sort of an afterthought. They eventually did get into it, but they had to take a NAND flash chip off the board, desolder it off the board, put it into a programmer, dump the firmware, find where in the firmware the device tree was listed for the Linux kernel that's going to be running on this. They finally were able to get that after a bit of analysis, make a bootable version of Linux that they could put on an SD card. It actually has an internal SD card reader that was unpopulated in the board, but they could put the SD micro card in there and boot this thing up and then do some analysis on it to see exactly what the vulnerabilities were. And even though it's got Bluetooth and this and that and the other thing, it turns out that it's pretty well locked down. It's not like you're going to walk up to it and have the pin for the Bluetooth that would be used by like a service engineer to reprogram it, reconfigure it, that kind of thing. You're not going to be able to spoof that and get control over it so you can get free charging. They did a lot of kind of forensic stuff on it and found that it was actually pretty solid, which was a nice surprise.
Yeah, that's like the best possible thing that can come out of it. On one hand, it's also like really sad. I hate it when these stories start off with, oh, we found 3 things that look like it's a serial port. We plugged into them and oh my God, it was U-boot. And I'm like, yes, winner. And then they're like, oh, but the U-boot was locked down really well and we just couldn't use that as a way to get in. And I'm like, oh, because in my own mind, I also kind of want the easy thing to work, but I understand that it shouldn't work from like a security perspective. On the other hand, if you're coming up to the thing and you're soldering pins onto the serial port, you might as well let that work. Don't make them have to go and desolder the flash to dump the firmware. That's just too much trouble. At least let them get in on U-boot. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it's nice to see a security teardown that ends up saying, oh yeah, this thing's totally fine, which is especially reassuring, noting that this electric car charger is called the Zaptec.
Yeah.
What do you not want to happen to you when you're plugging in an electric charger into a car? Zap.
It ended up being a pretty informative sort of after action report here. I really like these kind of things. I look at them. I watch videos like Hash does on smart meter hacking, and there's a whole bunch. There's one I'm going to write up today too. All these things, I watch them and I think, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I never do it. I should probably do it and just see what, just get some experience with that kind of stuff. Maybe even, just go get a piece of equipment that's not terribly interesting and, somebody has already broken into and just see if I can replicate that. Yeah. So I could get to the point where you could take an unknown device, put it on the desk, and I could look at it and say, I'll be unsoldering or desoldering this NAND flash here in a minute.
IP webcam.
I have one around here someplace. I've been meaning to get into that thing to see if, because it had some sort of spyware, firmware kind of thing on it when I originally used it. You had to have this app and you had to pay for it, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, I don't want any of that junk. I just want a camera that I can look at the front door. And I know I've got that around here someplace, and I know I've taken a look inside of it, and I know I'm pretty sure that there was a JTAG port in there. So I should just do it. Here we are talking about it instead.
And it gets worse because my next hack from Nina Kalinina is exactly this. It is a single board computer scavenged from a television set. And this is exactly the story of her walking down the street, finding a discarded smart TV and saying, "Ooh, smart. That means it has a computer in it." Firing it up, opening it up, soldering in there, connecting, seeing the bootloader, and completely owning it from there on out. It's actually exactly what you want to be doing, and here it is. The point here is that a lot of stuff that's obviously smart has little computers hidden inside it, and if you could figure out how to get them open, you don't have to go and try to even find a Raspberry Pi. Like, you could find a discarded television and it's got a better computer inside of it. And this one, of course, is meant for a smart TV. So it's got HDMI, it's got a TV out, it's got all this kind of good peripheral junk. So I suspect it's going to be lots of fun to hack on. If you want to see a lot more junk hacking, you should go through Nina's GitHub repository Chip Scavenger, where she takes apart a whole bunch of devices around the house and discovers that more of them have microcontrollers in them than you would expect. Something as simple as a toothbrush these days, of course, an electric toothbrush, it's got to turn on for a little while, it's got to turn off later. That's going to have a microcontroller you could use in it. Lamps these days all have them. She takes apart an electric foot file, I think, and discovers that this device, which by all means should just have a freaking on-off switch, actually has a small microcontroller chip in it as well to take place of the push button. I guess it's the push button on-off duties that it's handling. Anyway, the point is, here's a whole directory of hacks for you to look at, all the things you could take apart. Most of them have microcontrollers in them. This one smart TV actually has a pretty sweet-looking single-board computer. I think it's just really fun to think about all the hidden embedded electronics and everything. And I'm always like, this project could use one more microcontroller. And it turns out that industry has beaten me to the punch.
Linux really is everywhere. You pull one of these boards out of anything, a router, a TV. If you're pulling a board out of something, your almost default position is there's going to be a Linux boot prompt on there someplace. I'm going to see a Linux system when I finally get into that. If you see anything else, it kind of weirds you out. It's like, nah, it shouldn't
Yeah,
be that.
right?
It shouldn't be that way. I did a story not too long ago about point of sale terminals. Like, they're the kind of things that you would see strapped to the back of a monitor in a car part store or something like that. And to use those as because they're easy to get versus Raspberry Pis, you can get one of these machines for like $29 versus good luck trying to find a Pi these days. And it's got a lot of the same capabilities, and you can boot it up in Linux and have a good time with these machines. And they generally have some general purpose I/O too that is good to go. So I'll throw a link to that article in the show notes if I can find it.
I love all of this junk hacking. However, the necessity of it and the fact that we're doing this has just hit me that we are actually living in the Mad Max futuristic dystopia where you have to actually take apart old technology to get things you would otherwise just go buy at Micro Center. What has happened here?
On a slightly less, actually, no, I guess this kind of fits the same thing too. My next pick is a 3D printer repurposed for light duty lab automation tasks. This one caught my eye because literally lab automation was my job for the better part of 3 decades. The first part of it was completely in the lab doing physical lab automation. The latter half of my career was more data automation, so I wasn't in the lab on a daily basis. Building automated systems that would do high throughput screening, that would do high throughput cell culture, all kinds of different methodologies that needed to be supported. That was my gig. And this sort of reminded me of those days. Not all the memories are fond of those times. I tell you, we would have absolutely killed to have access to something that was a simple Cartesian robot platform that could be used for general purpose tasks. And that's what happened here. This is Marco Cinna and Vittorio, who are taking basically a bog standard off the shelf 3D printer, an Ender 3, making zero permanent modifications to it. Nothing about this unmakes it a 3D printer. It's still a 3D printer. It's still usable as a 3D printer. It has been, through the addition of some 3D printed accessories, has been transformed into a tool for histology, which basically is the staining of samples, biological samples, with different kinds of stains to see different kinds of structures. And you would do this in pathology to see, what the nature of a tumor is, to see the difference between healthy tissue and diseased tissue, that kind of thing. You would also do it for, all kinds of biological research where you need to take the things that are basically invisible in a slide because they're so small and so everything's transparent. By adding different stains that bind differently to different structures, you get to highlight the different parts of the innards of the cells. And it's a tedious process to do because you've got to, dip a little in here, wait a couple minutes, dry it off, dip a little in this one, dry it off, put it in a fixative. It's a bunch of these manual steps, which, like as I point out in the article, usually is something that you delegate to a grad student. But if you have a Cartesian automation platform like this, and you build a little clip that attaches to the slide carrier, and you build a holder for these trays that hold this solution, and you can move those trays around to lift up the slide holder with the Z-axis, move the trays around with the X and Y axis, you've got yourself an automation solution that was built for whatever an Ender costs these days, $200, $300. And the price of whatever filament you use to print these accessories. And the bonus is 5 minutes after it's done, if you need to make an improvement to your attachments, just take the clip off and print. It is still a printer. I really thought this was clever, and the use of the custom G code that just moves the platform around and does the up and down bits and does the timing and making sure that you can have these custom programs that do specific slide staining methods. I thought it was just brilliant, and I would have killed for this at some points in my career.
It's good to see. And this is worth noting that this comes out on Hardware X, which is an open source lab hardware platform. And I just love this sort of open source science stuff because it does help out labs that are on a budget. These days, I think that's more and more of them. So it's really good to see it enabling science to be done on more like a shoestring budget than the deluxe gilded buy $130,000 machines type budget.
I just registered for an account Hardware X because I want to see more of this kind of stuff. So maybe I can write articles on it. Watch out for that.
All right. My first quick hack this week is bike riding skeleton stalks the streets on Halloween. It's a skeleton on a bicycle with a skeleton dog in a little kind of outrigger sidecar. The secret is that the motor's hidden in the sidecar and the skeleton dog's actually driving the whole show. But when it rides down the street, of course, you have to think that the skeleton's powering it. Is this a late Halloween project or is this an early Halloween project? Depends on your perspective. Pretty Petite Pico libc powers processors. This is about Pico libc by Keith Packard. Libcs give you the creature comforts. This one is aimed at microcontrollers and a whole slew of them. Actually, I guess it'll run on a 386/586 as well. So if you just want to type printf instead of sending stuff to the serial buffer yourself, this may be worth having a look at. Next up, 2 citizen science hacks. We got wearable sensor trained to count coughs. Elvend has built a chest-mounted cough counting sensor that helps diagnose chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And RiverTech Jess has rapid prototyping to measure turbidity in rapids. This one is an ESP32. and IR, LED, and receiver, and it's in a nice waterproof housing. What do these two have in common? They're dirt simple projects that give you some insight into science and or medical conditions that you wouldn't have had before. And these are the kind of things that are one-offs that fit a niche that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago.
Okay, first up for me, a DIY equatorial mount using harmonic drives by Alan Zhengling Zhao. I picked this one strictly because the build quality here and the techniques are just gorgeous. It's machined out of solid aluminum. It's got a couple of stepper motors, and the harmonic drives themselves are off-the-shelf units, but still the whole thing is just a beautiful piece of machinery that gets your telescope pointing in the right direction at the right time to do astrophotography and other observations. Next up, we have Power Up Vintage Electronics Less Unsafely with a dim bulb tester. This is by Doze, and I love Donald Papp's characterization of less unsafely rather than safely, because that's an important distinction when you're powering up anything that might have cruddy old caps or shorted windings on a transformer or any other of a number of things that can go badly wrong in a 60th of a second when you power it on. This is basically a twist on the old trick of running a light bulb in series with the power supply of your device under test. If the device is shorted out, then the bulb is just going to glow brightly rather than blow anything up. The twist here is got two bulbs and a couple of switches that let you switch between one or both of those bulbs depending on the load of the device that you're testing. Plus, there's the nice little digital power factor meter and watt meter combined readout that makes this look a little bit more high tech than whatever you're probably plugging into it. Next up, we have Getting to the Heart of a Baofeng from a guy with a suspiciously familiar Swiss accent. His ham call sign is HB9BLA. We probably know him best as Andreas Spice. What he's done here is to take the SA818 RF module that lies at the heart of many cheap ham radios, the little transceivers that you can get for $25 or so, and do some experiments with them. There's a lot that you can do with these things, and he goes through some of that at the end of this video where he's showing people who have made pocket-sized repeaters, radios for digital applications, APRS endpoints, all kinds of neat tricks you can do with these things. You do have to take some care about filtering your RF output because there are going to be some harmonics that will probably put you into a non-compliant area of the band. But that's the way it is with the stock Baofeng radio anyways. And my last one is automatic lens cover helps cover up space launches. No, got that wrong.
Cover up space launches. I knew it.
Flat Earth, you know. Automatic lens cover helps cameras cover space launches. This is by Michael Baylor, and it is basically a quick 3D printed shutter that can go over the lens of his cameras that he sets up for watching space launches from an unsafe for humans distance, but safe for cameras. Although they do need to be covered up while they're sitting out there for hours, days, maybe. He has some problems with condensation. I guess this is a common problem with space launch photographers. The cover takes care of that and allows him to get some good quality shots. And this sort of harkens back to the earlier talk about Artemis 1 launch. I'll bet you more than one of these was stationed in a strategic location watching that launch last night. And we'd love to see the pictures from it.
All right, that brings us to the can't miss articles. These are long form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I got Christina Panos's EV sales sticking point, people still want manual transmissions. This story is about the unintended consequence that the nice property of electric cars that the motors pull with maximum torque from the start, which means they don't really have to have much gearing to them, if any, makes a lot of car enthusiasts yearn for the days where they had to switch up their gas driving motors to make the thing run in its power band at all. And I think it's a fun story. there's a ton of these like electric supercars, from the Porsche Taycan to the Tesla Model S when it's all decked out, that are just ridiculously fast. And the car enthusiasts moan here that it doesn't take any skill to do that. You just mash the button down to the ground and the thing goes fast. And I actually was visiting a friend of mine in San Diego and got to drive his Tesla. And it's true. You can like give everybody whiplash in the car just by hitting the floor. And the thing's essentially an automatic. So, uninteresting. And this leaves car enthusiasts feeling, I don't know what, nostalgic. I actually have a little story here. I used to drive a Saab 900 Turbo, and that thing was anemic as all hell until the turbo kicked in. And the turbo would kick in very slowly. It took a while to spool up. And so not only did you have to like stick shift to drive this thing, but if you actually wanted to drive it like it was a sports car, you had to be thinking about a half second ahead and give it the gas for the power that you wanted to have when you were approaching the apex of this turn, when you're not even there, because you had to like spool up the turbo to get there when you get there. Yeah, I mean, that was really fun to drive. Would I wish that on anyone else? I'm not so sure. What do you think?
This is about transmissions. This is about, the actual physical experience of driving. And I will completely agree with the proposal that it's way more fun to drive a manual transmission car. I feel like in some ways there's a safety edge to that, driving a manual transmission. You're more flexible in what you can do. I don't think it gives the safety edge to every driver. It kind of increases the load on the driver as far as, the tasks that they have to manage, clutch, downshift, upshift, all that stuff. So it does increase the workload on the driver, but it does, in my experience, it gives you more options. I can't count the number of times that being able to downshift rather than brake really saved my bacon on my 86 Toyota pickup that I drove for decades through all kinds of weather, with no anti-lock brakes, with no airbags, with nothing.
There's your problem right there, though. Cars these days have anti-lock brakes, so they don't lock up on the ice. And if the motor gives you, instant power regardless of which gear you're in or without any gear, then you don't care whether you're in, whether you've downshifted to third to overtake or not, right? Like if the car...
Right.
I do kind of want to play devil's advocate. I don't know if it's fair to play devil's advocate. I don't think Christina's arguing that electric cars need transmissions. I think she's just arguing that it's not as much fun, that they don't need transmissions. And
right.
So there is no devil's advocate here. I think she's right on that, and I don't know what to say. There's all sorts of ways you can, gimp your car to make it more fun and challenging to drive. And I'm all for that. Don't get me wrong.
I think we're in a position where any control over a car is going to be seen as kind of a desirable thing, because when we get to autonomous vehicles that drive us around, which I'm skeptical that's going to be anytime soon. Eventually, we're going to be kicked out of the cockpit, so to speak, altogether. We're just going to be there as a safety driver, or maybe not even that. We're just going to be a passenger, and we're not even going to have any access to any kind of controls. And we'll all yearn for the day. Remember the days when, you could actually sit and press a gas pedal and a brake, and, it was great, We're kind of in this window here between the internal combustion and alternate power for the car, whether that's electric or hydrogen or whatever. And we're still able to have these kind of arguments about what the best way to control a car is. Well, eventually we'll get to the point where, the argument's going to be, should you control the car at all? And we're just kind of in this little window here now that we have the luxury of arguing about this.
That's what I said to the policemen when they were pulling me out of the cabin in the front of the train. I was like, I really remember the days back when I was able to drive this train, and they just didn't have a word of it, and they threw me in jail.
True story, folks.
Yeah, not at all a true story. I actually totally enjoy taking the train because I can sit on my ass, fire up my computer. It's got Wi-Fi. I can do stuff, man. I don't have to sit there driving it. I do like sport driving for sport driving's sake, and I do like taking the train for raw commuting's sake. And I guess that may be part of what's going on here, is the like divide between the driving enthusiast who wants to feel more connected to the machine, and then the machines that are designed for people for their daily commutes, where it's like, yeah, just get me to work, man.
My choice for can't miss this week is The Importance of Physical Models, How Not to Shoot Yourself in the Foot or Anywhere Else. It's an interesting story. The F-11 was actually capable of, and on at least one instance, shooting itself down, which is an embarrassment as a pilot, one must imagine.
Sucks to be in the plane, is all I can say.
Circumstances of this are, in hindsight, sort of comical, but and luckily the pilot that actually did this did not end up dying as a result, but he did have some injuries, and ejecting from a plane is always a life-changing event. I've heard pilots can be up to an inch shorter when after a ride out of the cockpit, because it's so violent. But anyways, what happened here basically is that the plane was capable of traveling at supersonic speeds. The F-11 Tiger was armed with 4 20-millimeter cannons in the wing roots, and those bullets traveled approximately 1,000 meters a second. So you'd think, okay, well, 333 meters per second or so at the speed of sound. The bullets are traveling 1,000 meters a second. What's the problem? The plane's never going to catch up with the bullets. But remember all those physics lessons you had where they say disregard the effects of air resistance? And that's true for, like Al says, that's true until it's not true. And there's, at some point, you've got to take those things into account. And what they didn't take into account was the bullets were slowing down as the plane was in a dive. It was a Mach 1 dive, I guess, fired its cannons and eventually caught up to the bullets because air resistance had slowed them down. The bullets were traveling about 643 meters a second, and the plane was traveling about 1,400 meters a second. So the closing distance was 700 something meters a second. That's going to be a problem if you catch up to a 20 millimeter diameter chunk of lead or depleted uranium or whatever they used for rounds back in the 1950s. And this plane did, and took 3 rounds, one through the nose cone, one through the windshield, and one entered the starboard engine. And flames ensued. On the one hand, it's a little bit, concerning that 3 rounds can take down a modern, at the time, modern fighter jet. But I guess that's just a testament to how complex those machines were, or still are, just to a large degree, that a wound like that could take them down. But the point of this whole thing is that nobody had done the testing to see if this was possible until the pilot did the testing in real world circumstances, and discovered to his dismay that, yeah, it is possible for the plane to catch up to the bullets. This lesson, to me, it's almost really not about the plane. Al's article really isn't about the plane and this interesting thing that happened to this plane and the other ones. But it really points out that engineering is a discipline for a reason, and that things need to be engineered by engineers. I mean, that sounds really simplistic and kind of silly, but that's really the point. You can't do seat of the pants engineering. You can't just phone it in. You really need to do the tests. And all that said, I don't know what the test here would have been with the
This
F-11.
was the test. The story was the test. He was he was doing the first time anyone was in a dive on this thing. It went really fast. The bullets hit it.
And
bullets
now
fell back down and got him. Yeah.
So now engineering is a discipline for a reason, and you call it a discipline. That's one of the things I admire about people who have gone through the process of becoming a credentialed engineer and being able to, to have the confidence to look at a set of drawings, to look at some data, to look at, like Al says, physical models, and have the confidence to be able to say, yes, I'm right. This is going to work according to the numbers that I have, and then put that out in the public and have people stand on it, or have it fly over people, or, whatever the situation is, and be confident that your numbers were right. And I really admire that, and good job, engineers.
I don't know what I think about this. Like, the people designing this plane were aeronautics engineers. They were aerospace engineers. In fact, they were designing, at the time, a cutting-edge plane. They probably really knew their stuff. If you'd asked them, at a bar later on, if you shoot a bullet, does it slow down? They would say, why, yes, it does. It's not like they didn't know that this phenomenon was there. And it's not like they didn't, had they thought of it, they would have probably said, oh, yeah, that could happen. I don't know if I see the solution here as the problem. It's not non-intuitive that bullets slow down once you shoot them. It's non-intuitive that you could shoot yourself in the same plane. And I guess maybe before then it hadn't happened. So, in that case, it was not just non-intuitive. It was something that no one had ever encountered. And whenever you do anything, especially if it's something new, there's always kind of a set of assumptions you go into it with. And I think when planes were slower, the set of assumptions that included you don't have to worry about bullets because they're traveling so much faster than the plane was valid. And then here you go making a plane that, in a dive can go Mach 1 easily. And then all of a sudden, these kind of old assumptions aren't valid anymore. Engineering's also one of these kind of cumulative disciplines that builds up on, learned knowledge from before, and this is the way we do things. And I think that's exactly what shot them in the foot here, is that, one of the things they never worried about before was running into your own bullets. And then here with a plane that's fast enough to do so, they all of a sudden had to.
I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think there's probably a case to be made for all engineering errors to be a failure of imagination. This used to happen to me in my old job all the time. I'd be building a robot or building an automation system. One of the brass would be like, is this going to work? I don't know. I honestly, I can't tell you that it's going to work. We're doing something we've never done before. We've never handled 1 million data points a day. Yeah. Is it going to scale? I think so. I've tested it. I tested it against this. I tested against that. I can show you all the tests I did. I can't show you all the tests I didn't do.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the one that gets you, is the test you didn't do. And I used to tell them all the time, I can only test the things that I can imagine are going to happen.
Yeah.
And I can imagine a lot of bad things happening. I'm a pretty paranoid guy, right? I know there's a lot on the line. There's my reputation. There's, money, the blah, blah, blah. I'm not building a bridge. I'm not building a fighter aircraft. I'm building data systems that are going to, harvest a lot of information. But they're going to devote a lot of resources to the wet end of this that's going to make this data. And if I screw it up, it's gone forever. So it was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on me, and I tested as much as I can, but I kept telling them I can only test the things that I can imagine are going to go wrong. And there were plenty of times where they came to me and said, "Hey, this went wrong. What happened?" I was like, "I don't know."
Right.
I didn't imagine that was a failure mode. Oh, now I know it can be a failure mode. I will not make that mistake again. I never did make that whatever that mistake was. I didn't make because I learned.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly the point here, is that this was kind of a learning mistake. I guess I just don't think that you can always foresee all possible cases, right? And this is kind of what you're getting at, is it's superhuman to be able to see all possible failure modes.
In the words of Gandalf the Grey, even the very wise may not see all ends. I mean, I probably screwed up the quote.
That guy was good. Thanks, Gandalf. Well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks for listening. If you want to drop some comments or check out the links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you want to send us some tips for future articles, the email would be tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
What the hell?
I think mine was a little late. Yeah, microsecond or two.
Hold up.
Razzle dazzle?
I'm done with that. I'm done.
I'm done with this guy.
How am I going to phrase this?
Oh, okay.
I think that will work. Nope. Nope. Bail out on that.
I'm punching out. Here we go.